Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 211 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the importance of minerals, and not just like, hey, you should have an electrolyte formula every day. I'm not even talking about that. We are going to talk about minerals and certain minerals, and specifically why they can be so helpful, not only for your skin, but also in general for your health. And you're going to understand now why when you drink water and then you constantly end up running to the restroom because you've got to urinate, we're going to talk about why that happens. This episode is based off of a personal experiment that I've been conducting on yours truly for the past several months after being influenced and inspired by my colleague who's joining us today as a guest on the show to talk about minerals and the importance of minerals. And I have to tell you, some really surprising things happened. I was initially very skeptical, and all of my skepticism has been thrown out the window because I now recognize for me that this particular idea or concept of adding more minerals into the diet was necessary. I mean, I do supplement with magnesium, but I didn't recognize some of the other things that we're going to talk about today because it's constantly pushed on us that it's not a good thing. And so I hope that you'll keep an open mind with today's conversation. I'm super excited to share this with you, and I'll be curious to hear how your personal experiments go, especially if this is a good and safe option for you. My guest today is a friend and colleague. Her name is Kaely McDevitt, and she is a registered dietitian specializing in women's health. She owns a virtual private practice where she and her team help clients overcome hormone and digestive issues through personalized nutrition. Having experienced the pitfalls of a conventional approach to women's health firsthand, Kaely is passionate about empowering women to take the driver's seat over their health and well-being. So without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Kaely, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I'm so excited to finally have you here. I mean, it's so great because we've been chatting so much over the past, maybe year-ish.
Yeah.
And so it's been great to get to know you. And I'm so glad that I get to introduce you to the rest of my audience. I feel like it's like my Healthy Skin Show family.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited too.
So here's the thing. A lot of people think that minerals like sodium, right, especially sodium, are bad for you, and that we already get too much salt in our diets, especially as Americans and in the Western, I guess the quote unquote Western world. But the reality is, and at least from what I've gathered and learned from you and other colleagues of yours, is that minerals, that perhaps we have mineral supplementation wrong. Mm-hmm. And so why would that be? It's not your whole thing, but you do talk a lot about the benefits of adding in minerals, including sodium. So just from the get-go, why do we have this whole idea about minerals, especially sodium, wrong?
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like there's a lot to unpack with that. Just to backtrack even further than that and at least catch everybody up to the same page of what even are minerals, because I feel like we don't really talk about that fundamentally. And I think, having gone through school to become a dietitian and obviously learning about nutrients and micronutrients specifically, which is the umbrella that minerals fall under, there's a lot of attention on vitamins. We talk about those a lot. We talk about vitamin C and vitamin D and the B complex. We talk about that. And I don't remember spending a ton of time in school talking about minerals specifically, but those are considered micronutrients. So they're naturally occurring essential compounds that we need to function and develop optimally. And minerals function by allowing all of the enzymes in our cells to do what they need to do. So when we think about optimal health, whether that be from a skin standpoint, a hormone standpoint, which is more the realm that I'm in with my clients, energy, brain health, really any facet of health comes down to a functioning metabolism. the ability to create energy at the cellular level. And if we zoom into what's going on there, minerals are involved in every single step of that process. And it was a big aha moment for me when I had spent, so much of my time in school and years of practice really focusing on higher level stuff like vitamins and the hormones themselves and digestion. And it wasn't until I started digging into the minerals that I felt like I was really getting at the why behind why people were having symptoms, and actually being able to make like significant progress in overcoming those symptoms in a pretty quick time frame. And I had firsthand experience with that too. I know you and I were talking about this before we recorded. We like to guinea pig with ourselves first, and if it makes a difference, then cool, we bring it to the clients. And minerals go a really, really long way. And it's unfortunate that we've been so afraid of sodium for so long. We've also been afraid of a lot of foods that are mineral rich in other areas too that we can talk about, but the sodium piece is the one that I think is the most outstanding. And it comes down to there being a really, really big difference between refined salt sources, so what we would find in like processed packaged food and fast food, like your standard American diet type table salt, and unrefined mineral rich salt. And when we have that salt as it occurs in nature, where it comes with all of its other mineral buddies, we have a very different physiological effect than like very refined table salt that's literally just the sodium.
And so who would be, I know you said like skin issues and hormone issues, but what are some basic, probably pretty common complaints or symptoms that people who could benefit from potentially, isn't this crazy? We're talking about supplementing with minerals like salt that they could benefit from. What would some of the symptoms or complaints be that they might, in their normal day notice?
If you feel like you drink water and it goes right through you, like you're really thirsty and just constantly peeing, which that was totally me. I think it was you too from our conversation.
It was.
Yeah, and I honestly was like striving for this optimum state of like clear urine, and water was just going right through me. So that's a common complaint from clients is like, man, I'm constantly thirsty, constantly drinking, and also spending my entire day in the bathroom. And that's telling us that water is going through you and not actually getting to the cells where you're hydrated on a cellular level, and minerals like sodium have a lot to do with that. Low energy is very common as a result of that cellular dehydration. Anyone that has any amount of stress in their life, which I always feel funny saying because that's everybody, has a need for minerals because we burn through them a lot faster under stress. And then digestive complaints. So if you've dealt with like persistent low stomach acid, so whether that presented as full-on heartburn or reflux, or we just have a hard time digesting food, like a lot of discomfort after meals, or maybe you've even seen it on some testing, lack of minerals, particularly good sodium, is a big underlying root cause for poor stomach acid production.
Well, there we go, folks. That should be enough for you to go, geez, maybe I should actually do this. So I want to tell you guys how we got here, because you might be curious to know that the reason is that I have a client who has some particular heart issue that nobody's been able to figure out. And so I sometimes like to think outside of the box and think, well, what hasn't been done? What could we try that might not hurt anything, and see if it works. You never know. You don't know until you try. And so Kaely had been talking a lot on Instagram about minerals and doing these, like, what do you call them? They're mocktails or mineral mocktails, or I don't know. Everybody has different terms for them.
There's like adrenal cocktails, mineral mocktails, electrolytes. You've got a whole lot of ideas.
And so I reached out to Kaely and was like, hey, I have this client with this interesting situation. She's open to trying to add in some electrolytes and whatnot beyond just like a normal electrolyte formula. And what do you suggest? And so she sent me this little recipe, and I sent it to the client, and I thought, I should try this on myself. And so I fortunately had bought during, our quarantine thing, I had bought cream of tartar, which I actually did not know was potassium.
Yeah.
And then I also do personally purchase like a Redmond's sea salt, real salt, I guess. And so you had suggested a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt in, some sort of mixture with water and whatnot. And so I've been adding that just the 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt, because I found that the cream of tartar kind of like bothers my system a tad. So I'm gonna work on that. But the thing I immediately noticed was that I wasn't peeing all day. That's always been my complaint. It's probably why I don't drink enough fluids, because I'm constantly getting up to go to the bathroom. And then number 2, I noticed that I actually had a lot more energy in the afternoon. And after I started doing this for about a week or 2, I noticed I began to crave it. Like normally I have that beverage like right around this time when we are recording this podcast. And even right now I'm like, I want that thing.
Yeah.
Like I want it. I crave it. And it's so fascinating to me that I have found this to be so helpful, especially when I've been outside working in the hot sun, out in the garden or whatever. I'll come in and it just like snaps me out of any like low energy, exhaustion, fatigue or whatever from just being out in the hot, like kind of humid sun.
Yeah.
So that being said, let's talk about some of these minerals. Like, what do you think is a good first step for people who might be interested in doing this? And I think pretty much every one of my clients could be a good candidate for testing this out.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing would be to upgrade the type of salt that you're using, because we've got to do that first before we're making any of these, fancy mineral beverages, because that quality of that salt matters. So the Redmond's real salt that you mentioned is great. I usually have that one on hand. I also like the Celtic sea salt as well. Those are usually the 2 that I rotate through, and we're just looking for an unrefined high quality salt, and those are 2 of the most common. There are others for sure. And then once we have that, we can experiment with either just adding a little bit more of that at mealtime, which feels totally foreign, because I remember even in my years in school, I was like telling myself I was doing a great job that I never salted my food. And I think it was a total disservice to myself with the amount of stress I was under during those years. I was also an avid distance runner at the time, so don't even get me started on the amount of mineral depletion that was probably going on. And so I'd start with salt quality, adding that to your food. And then if you're feeling really rambunctious, we can start making a little adrenal cocktail for you. And so the term adrenal cocktail, I believe, came from a guy named Morley Robbins. So if this whole mineral concept is really piquing your interest, I would look him up, because he's got some great courses and offerings. But an adrenal cocktail is providing sodium, potassium, and whole food vitamin C. And it's those 3 nutrients that your adrenal glands use like significant amounts of. And your adrenal glands are what are responding to stressors throughout the day. They're also regulating fluid balance and hydration, and also indirectly keeping blood sugar steady for you via cortisol. So when we are stressed, when we are, and that includes like physical stressors, like working out in the hot sun, but also like existing in our society today, which is inherently stressful, we've got to replenish those nutrients for our adrenal glands to keep up with demand. So it's no surprise that you notice better energy throughout the day. I certainly do too as a result. And it's a really easy experiment to do. And if it's going to be a good fit for you, you will notice that pretty instantaneously, which is fun for us as practitioners, because very rarely does an intervention have a quick payoff.
That is true, because sometimes you're looking at 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months until you really start to notice an impact. And even then, sometimes people are like, is this going to start working? And I'm like, well, you got a lot of problems here. We're pushing a boulder up a hill right now. But you're right. That was pretty immediate. I was like, wow, I actually feel better. So is magnesium a part of this whole equation? Because I talk a lot about magnesium in my practice, but how does that relate to, say, sodium or potassium and just this whole like mineral balance?
Yeah, so magnesium is hugely important, and I very rarely have like blanket recommendations for most individuals, but magnesium is one of the ones that I always feel comfortable with, because like I mentioned, if you have any stress in your life, we're burning through magnesium pretty quickly. We're also not getting a ton of magnesium in our food these days because the soil's pretty depleted. And magnesium is like our anti-stress, our nature's muscle relaxant. It's involved in insulin sensitivity too, so blood sugar balance. And if sodium and potassium are really depleted because our adrenal glands have been overworked, or we're just not getting enough of that in food, we have a hard time keeping magnesium where it belongs. So you can think of sodium and potassium, like our primary electrolytes, as keeping things in solution. So without enough sodium and potassium, magnesium's not in solution, and it's not where it belongs, which is inside our cells, helping things work. And magnesium is fundamental for energy production. Like when you look at an ATP molecule, there's a magnesium attached to it. So if we don't have magnesium in the cell, guess what? We're not making energy. If we're not making energy, metabolism's down, thyroid's down, really everything is down. So magnesium is a big piece of this puzzle.
I wanted to say it's almost like, so ATP, for everybody who hasn't, if you didn't hear my podcast on the mitochondria, your little power plants of the cell, ATP is like our energy currency of the body. Your adrenal glands do not make energy. Your mitochondria do. And so in order to, it's almost like ATP is like coins in the bank, but in order to get them out, you got to have the magnesium. The magnesium's like the bank card to get the money out of the bank.
I like that.
So to speak. So you have to have magnesium to activate ATP in order for it to do what it's going to do. And that's so interesting, though, the idea that we need the sodium and does chloride also play a part in this as well?
Yep, that would be considered an essential mineral too. It doesn't really get the airtime that like the sodium and potassium do, but yeah, it's definitely part of it. And that's where food sources of all of this really shines, because nature got it right when things exist together. Like you're not gonna just find isolated minerals in a natural product. You're gonna see all of them in like the very appropriate ratios coming together. And I think that's where we can get why I think mineral focus is so fun and refreshing as a nutrition practitioner is we get to go back to like food recommendations and away from some of the complexities and intricacies of other protocols for a minute.
Before we go into the food piece to this, somebody might be listening and going, well, doesn't my comprehensive metabolic panel, the labs that I go get run once a year, like I look at those and they look fine.
Yeah.
But you're telling me I need more sodium. I need more, even sometimes they'll run just the magnesium.
Yeah.
The serum magnesium, which is not, sorry, friends, it's not that helpful. So for somebody who is looking at their comprehensive metabolic panel and seeing the minerals listed on there, can you tell us why that might not be a good frame of reference to make a decision of whether supplementing with minerals is ideal for you or not?
For sure. So blood work, particularly those basic types of panels, are telling us what's going on in the blood, which is in transit. So we're not looking at what's going on inside the cells. We're looking at what's, going to and fro inside the body. And your body has to regulate what's in that blood within very tight tolerances. So if something is out of whack with your minerals on blood work, like something is very serious, and it's probably been that way for a long time. The other issue with blood work is that that's going to be subject to change based on hydration status. So if you go and get your blood drawn and you're very dehydrated, like should you have the stomach flu and end up getting blood work as you're getting an IV, which is a common scenario, those are going to look out of whack. And then if you are chugging a ton of fluids and you're in that camp of like drinking a ton and immediately peeing, we're going to see them out of whack from being overhydrated too. So we just don't get much meaningful data from blood labs for mineral status because it's so transient and it's telling us what's in transit, not what's actually in the tissues and cells.
So in your practice, do you also find that the values that look at what's inside red blood cells to be more helpful? Because I know a lot of times, at least I've gotten pushback from some doctors saying that's not necessary. These are good enough. The serum values are fine. But in reality, from a nutrition perspective, at least what I was taught was that the red blood cell value is a more accurate gauge from the body functioning perspective.
Definitely.
Is that the case for you as well?
Yeah, particularly with that magnesium. So you'd have to request a red blood cell magnesium. It's usually serum, but that's going to be a much more meaningful data point for us. for most of those minerals that you can test. I'm also a big fan of the HTMA, the hair tissue mineral analysis, and that's looking at what's going on at the tissue level, and it's about a 3-month average of mineral status. So that's been a really nice addition to the information that we might collect per client, because we kind of need to see what's going on in the blood and elsewhere, and that can give us an opportunity to see a much bigger picture and where we might have a breakdown in absorption or transport or entry into the cell.
Can I ask one other question? This just kind of popped into my head.
Yeah.
I remember in grad school that inside our GI tract, we have these divalent metal transporters to pull minerals into the body. And one thing that they had taught us was that when we have a constant influx of minerals, it can actually competitively it'll competitively compete. It competes with heavy metals. And so would this be another reason why having an ample supply of things like sodium and whatnot coming into the body could also help in sort of crowding out the availability of those transporters for us to absorb heavy metals?
Totally. That's a really interesting thought and makes a lot of sense. I would be confident in saying yes to that. And we see that even on an HTMA, that when you can correct somebody's foundational mineral status and improve their metabolic state, they can actually offload heavy metals so much more significantly. So you might see that on a retest, which is really, really cool.
Wow. So that's really simple, because you don't have to even do, it's not to say it replaces something like chelation, where if someone's has a huge high body burden, but that could be a really simple step for someone who is struggling with some level of any type of heavy metal exposure.
Right. And we're getting that exposure, that's an inevitable situation, and particularly depending on water quality of your area and filtration and all that. So I don't think, like you said, this would address an overt toxicity, but certainly for the day-to-day exposures that we have, if we've got the ability to make energy at the cellular level, hey, we can now offload metals better, we can move toxins better, we can digest better, all kinds of good things fall into place.
Yeah. So let's talk about some food sources of some of these good minerals, because that is important. I think that's a great place to kind of get this conversation into some, I don't know. I think it's great that, like, you also provided me these simple things like cream of tartar, which I know is not a whole food source, but the sea salt is. That has a great spectrum of minerals that you're not going to find in just like straight old table salt, because it's mostly just sodium. Sodium chloride, pretty much.
Exactly. Yep. So good quality salt. And we've obviously feared salt for a while, so that can take some getting used to bringing that back in. And then the potassium-rich sources, which if I had to pick like a favorite of these foundational minerals, it would probably be potassium. And I persistently see that low in the clients that we serve here. And potassium you're going to find in highest quantities in things like fruits and starchy vegetables. So like your potatoes and sweet potatoes and squashes and bananas. And working in the women's health space, I see a lot of women that have been chronic dieters. And
doing low carb.
Yes.
Low carb, yeah.
Not only have we been taking salt away from people, but we've been avidly avoiding potassium containing foods. So getting those back into the mix can also be a period of unlearning and transition. But those are our main potassium providers, and we don't get the same potassium quantities from like a grain, so to speak. So wherever we've replaced like potatoes and starchy veggies and fruit with like a slice of bread or rice, we're missing out on an opportunity for potassium. So those would be some of my favorite things to bring in. Bone broths or veggie broths are also very mineral rich. And then the one that nobody likes, but at least we can supplement, would be organ meats.
Oh.
I can't do it, but I can supplement it.
Fair enough. Yeah. Organ meats are not my thing. Even my sister, when she told me, I used to eat liverwurst as a kid, and she mentioned, oh, you know what that is? And I was like, no, it's liverwurst. And she's like, it's liver. And I was like, oh. And I never ate it again. Everything changed. Never ate it again. But that's interesting. If you supplement it in a capsule, would you still? I guess you would still have access to the minerals that are at least in that small quantity that you would consume.
Yep, definitely. And so depending on what's going on with the individual, you might need a full dose of that on a daily basis. But as a maintenance standpoint, if you're thinking about how people probably ate, like ancestrally speaking, I don't think they were eating liver every day. So having like a serving of that a week or once or twice a week can be a great way to mimic that, especially if eating it outright is off the table, which it certainly is for me. I have really, really tried a lot of recipes and I just can't do it.
It's not your thing. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I have a question for you. I know you talked about whole food options, but I guess there's some instances where supplementing, and I do recommend sometimes clients need magnesium citrate or they'll need magnesium glycinate. And so there may be a time and a place to supplement individual minerals. Like, do you ever just individually supplement potassium, like in a capsule, or not commonly?
I don't commonly go the capsule route for that, really just because I couldn't find a brand that had more than like 99 milligrams in a capsule. And when we are repleting potassium for somebody, we need that in like pretty significant quantities to be able to accomplish it. And I just didn't want to have somebody taking handfuls of capsules if we didn't have to. So we can work around that with various powders that are on the market, or like cream of tartar is an option to mimic that at home. And then also a lot of fruit juices like orange juice, pineapple juice, all of those have a significant amount of potassium too. So we can even mix that in, which is another one of those like anti-diet culture things we have to come to terms with. Mm-hmm.
You're talking about juice and I'm like,
juice and carbs and salt.
Juice. This conversation. All right. So what would be the use then, I guess, of if say I wanted to try some orange juice or some pineapple juice, which has a lot of sugar in it.
It totally does.
But what's your recommendation? I assume you're not like, go drink the whole bottle.
No, I'm not recommending that. Usually what I have people do is like 2 to 4 ounces of a juice mixed with water, mixed with the other stuff that we're trying to combine in our mineral beverage here. And usually I'm trying to do it all at once. Like I'll have the sodium, potassium, magnesium in the mix, some vitamin C, like we're just going to make this really solid. And because we are providing some sugar, which I don't think is inherently a bad thing at all. And ironically enough, those minerals are needed for us to have the insulin sensitivity required to process that sugar too. So I do think in one way we're helping with that situation, but it really affects the taste, which is good. And if somebody is worried about or experiencing blood sugar swings as a result of including that juice, what we can do is either include that at mealtime so that there's a protein or a fat on board at the same time, or we can actually add proteins or fats to that beverage. So you could do like collagen protein in there. You could do some cream or coconut milk inside to add some fats. You can make some really tasty like orange creamsicle type concoctions if we go down that path. But there are ways to help make sure that that's not messing with anyone's blood sugar stability, especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah, we are really poking the bear here with all of But this is important. And I know for a lot of you listening, we talk mostly about skin issues, but we also talk about hydration, right? Hydration of the skin. And it most of the time doesn't come from the outside in, it comes from the inside out. And so if you're not able to actually absorb the water into the cells, you are literally every time you keep incessantly peeing all day long, it's keeping you up all night long. There's some issue there. I would assume though, if somebody's on some sort of medication, are there any particular medications where maybe they might have to talk to their doctor first?
Yeah, anything that's affecting like sodium, potassium, or fluid balance. So a lot of like blood pressure medications or like arrhythmia medications will affect sodium and potassium. So you're always going to want to run that by your doctor and make sure that we're being safe there. Much like your client with kind of an obscure heart issue, I've certainly had clients with really severe heart palpitations or even AFib that we've been able to either fully resolve or at least really reduce with working on minerals, because those are so involved in heart contractility. But if we've got medications that are messing with that too, we just want to make sure we're being safe there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any final thoughts on like your favorite type of what do you call adrenal cocktail, mineral mocktail, like any suggestions for people if they want to go do this? I know we've got a great, you've got a webinar replay that is really going to be really helpful for somebody who wants to dive deeper into this whole topic, especially if you've experienced a lot of burnout, which a lot of people in my community are dealing with that. They've been under a ton of stress. Many of them have been exposed chronically to topical steroids, which does absolutely impact the amount of cortisol that your body actually makes in and of itself. That's a whole nother topic for another day. But favorite product suggestions or like maybe a recipe, like a quick recipe you can throw out there and everybody can give it a shot.
For sure. So like the original adrenal cocktail is from a company called Jigsaw Health. You can find them on Amazon. You can find it on Fullscript too now, which is cool. And so that is literally Redmond's salt, potassium bicarbonate, and some whole food vitamin C. There's no flavoring or any sweeteners added, so on its own tastes really disgusting. And it even says on there, we know this does not taste good. So I like to mix that with like 4 ounces of orange juice. So that's giving me more vitamin C, more potassium, and flavoring this otherwise very salty concoction. And then I add the rest water. I might add some magnesium to that too, just in a powdered form. Like usually magnesium glycinate is what I do the best with. And that's my favorite. Now you can certainly DIY this. I am just going to be consistent with something that doesn't take me much time. So the fact that that powder's already made just saves me some steps in the morning. And I think, that is worth me paying for it. But if you look at those ingredients, you can definitely recreate that yourself. That's where the 1/4 teaspoon of good salt, 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar, and about 4 ounces of orange juice came from, is mimicking that recipe.
Got it. So these are some things. And by the way, everyone, if you follow Kaely on Instagram, you're going to see a lot of these different concoctions on her Instagram. So she's got a lot of great information there that you can also learn. And, especially too, if you're uncomfortable with the idea of spending a lot of money on, there are formulas. There's a lot of electrolyte formulas, especially now with the rise of the carnivore diet and the keto diet and whatnot. And especially, friends, if you're doing carnivore, you really, really, really need to watch your sodium and magnesium and everything. It will really not make you feel well if you do not. You have to do something. It is non-negotiable.
Yep. Amen.
So Kaely, where can we find you?
So you can find me. I spend most of my non-client facing hours on Instagram. So it's at Kaely RD. And my name is spelled weird. It's Kaely. And then my website is the same, KaelyRD.com, and do a lot of educating over on Instagram, some like blog articles on my website. And then the class that you were talking about is a recording of a lecture I taught on burnout. And this was because my community was echoing the same thing that yours is. People have been under an enormous amount of stress in the last 1.5 years, and it's showing up in their physical well-being. So we talked about what's going on physiologically and then how we can help get ourselves out of it. And a lot of it has to do with working on mineral repletion. So if this was interesting, we get even further into that and some more product recommendations in that.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much. I'll have to have you come back sometime and talk more about hormones. I know that that's also a big focus in your practice, and that obviously is a big question. I get asked about hormones a lot, and I'm like, that's not my wheelhouse. But thank you so much for being here and sharing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
I love this particular topic, and I've been playing around with it ever since I had this conversation with Kaely. I'm appreciative that she was willing to share her knowledge on the show, and I'll be curious to hear how your experiments go as well. You can find all of the resources that we've talked about over on the podcast at skinterrupt.com/211. There you can also leave any questions or comments so we can keep the conversation going. And then just as I'm sharing this particular information with you, right? I was inspired, I tested it out on myself, and I am now sharing it with you. I invite you to in turn share it with somebody else, someone who you know may be interested in experimenting with adding more minerals in through their diet with the tips that we've shared today. And lastly, I invite you to head on over to your podcast platform of choice, rate and review the Healthy Skin Show, and then hit the subscribe button. That way you don't miss a weekly dose of hope, inspiration, research, tips and tricks, all meant to help you rebuild healthy skin. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.